Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. Boosts, /lines, bonuses all day long. Play some DFS player prop contests on there. It's a real fun platform. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 156 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. We've got UFC Edmonton this weekend, eh?
Oh, what is it?
Poutine.
Poutine.
Golden moment from the press conferences this week. Now, folks, this week in MMA, it's another sort of light one. We got ACA, Cage Warriors, but next week we got Invicto, One, LFA, Octagon. For my picks on all of that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Check out my recent episode with Evan Wilsmore on all things indoor football league and alternative professional football. Check out my MMA DFS values picks article that's coming out on Friday afternoons. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about UFC Edmonton. Let's talk about what you're doing for your DFS lineups and your bets for this weekend. And then I also, it seems like I will be doing some MMA slideshow content through RotoBaller on MSN coming up. So keep an eye out for that. That should be a real fun thing as I get into something new. Again, can I fit it in? We shall see. Just moved into a new house. It's been the third move in about less than 2 years or so. But getting adjusted to a new environment, and this podcast is christening this new house. Folks, we got 14 fights for UFC Edmonton. Last week was a horrible week of picking. So many of those plus 200 juicy underdogs got me hook, line, and sinker. What I didn't realize fully yet, what my heart didn't want to realize, is that it was a new era, and it is now the times of Ilya Topuria and Khamzat Chimaev, and Robert Whittaker and Max Holloway, suffered because of that. Anyway, we got 14 fights for UFC Edmonton. Starting off with Jamie Lynn Horth and Ivana Petrovic. Jamie Lynn Horth is the minus 220 favorite. Ivana Petrovic, the plus 185 underdog. So starting off with Jamie Lynn Horth, the favorite. Won her UFC debut by unanimous decision over Haley Cowan. Lost a split decision her last time out this past December against Veronica Hardy, in which the statistics were almost completely even. 43 to 43 in the strike-in, one takedown each. That's it's about as close as a fight can get. And so her opponent, Ivana Petrovic, is coming off of a third-round arm triangle choke victory over Na Liang. Lost her UFC debut to Luana Carolina in July 2023 by unanimous decision. I wish the win over Na Liang meant just a little bit more. I think being competitive with Luana Carolina is meaningful. This one, it's like two fighters that are 1-1 in the UFC in the women's flyweight division. The Haley Cowan win for Jamie Lynn Horth is probably the most impressive win that either of the two have at this level. At least Jamie Lynn Horth was able to land 76 strikes. I don't know, though. I'm trying to be a little bit more cautious on some of these. I still want to make picks for every fight. But, I don't know, Ivana Petrovic plus 185, I think that this is a pretty, I think it's a pretty even matchup. I think the most likely outcome is probably a Horth over Haley Cowan's situation. You know, like even if Ivana Petrovic gets her few takedowns, that, you know, she'll still get beaten on the feet by Jamie Lynn Horth. But, you know, what do I go with there? You know, I think like Horth by decision, which is minus 125. I think that's all right. I think Petrovic plus 185 is a pretty solid value too. And you're just, even if she gets outstruck by 20, 30 strikes, you're looking for the takedowns and the advantageous grappling positions to kind of carry you home. And I don't think that you need to go method of victory there. And I think like Horth by split decision, that's plus 550. I think that's one to look at as well. This is not one that I'm looking to, you know, to put more units on than what is average. That's what you get at women's flyweight starting off this card. And the Canadians obviously hoping that they can rebound from their last showing in Canada. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Chad Anhelinger and Cody Gibson. Anhelinger actually is now 3-2 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series, wins over Jesse Strader. Most recently, a win over Charalampos Gregorio. I don't know, maybe, you know, I would like to say that that means more, maybe after, you know, Cameron Smotherman's win. But I think Cameron Smotherman's win is really circumstantial, and you can't do that kind of math anyway. I don't want to, you know, Anhelinger has only lost in the UFC or to Alatang Ali and Jose Johnson. That's nothing to be ashamed of. He's got, you know, he's done enough to remain around. I give him that credit. Cody Gibson, actually the younger fighter here. Kind of hard to believe. And this is a dude who, over the course of a decade in the UFC, I think he's actually, I mean, fought like the way tougher competition. This guy, I mean, like, it's not a hot take, by the way. Had to fight all Joe in his UFC debut. Fought Manny the Manville the Anvil Gambarian. There we go. Douglas Silva de Andrade, Brad Katona, Miles Johns, finally coming off a submission victory over Brian Kelleher. The odds here, we got Cody Gibson actually is a minus 187 favorite, and Anhelinger the plus 162 underdog. I'm more so like, I don't think that plus 162 is an awesome price for Anhelinger. Give me, you know, plus 200, we can talk, because Anhelinger has just been around, and like Cody Gibson, we've seen like this is a dude that should have maybe gotten more wins in his time in the UFC. It's just like he ended up fighting so many tough fighters. And before the Kelleher fight, even though Kelleher was on his, you know, kind of on his last leg in the UFC, it was still a big barrier to break through for Cody Gibson. But he had so many tries, and it failed to come up with a win in the UFC. So I don't know, like, honestly, Cody Gibson minus 187 is not horrible. I think that he probably wins this fight like 75, maybe 80 times out of 100. Gibson by like submission plus 400. Gibson inside the distance plus 240. Those are probably my favorite picks here. I don't really think that anything on Anhelinger is worth it. I think that this fight is actually very appropriately handicapped. And so in that situation, I'm going with the guy that I think is winning the vast majority of the time. And I could see myself using Cody Gibson in DFS for the right price, obviously. And now that I think about it, I don't know if he's going to be there. But we shall see. I'll probably have my DFS lineups out sometime tomorrow, I would imagine. Next up, we've got another bantamweight matchup between Serhiy Saidi and Garrett Armfield. Garrett Armfield is the plus 120 underdog. Saidi the minus 140 favorite. Let's talk about Garrett Armfield. Coming off the loss to one Brady Bam Bam High-Stander we were supposed to see recently. You've seen him on this show. Tap that. Go listen to that episode if you don't get a chance. Brady High-Stand is a great, upstanding young gentleman. Got subbed in round 3 by Brady High-Stand. He was doing really well in the strike, but like you just have to put Bam Bam away. He is like one of those fan favorite fighters for a reason. He is never out of it until you put him away, and Garrett Armfield fell victim to that back in June of this year. He was on a 2-fight winning streak with wins over Toshiomi Kazama and Brad Katona. outstriking him 105-64, did get taken down 4 times. So his only UFC losses are both by submission to David Onama and to Heistan. Saidi, also born in 1996, won on the Contender Series by first-round knockout over Ramon Tavares. Then, because of the weird circumstances of that one, they end up rematching. 4 months later at UFC 297, he gets a split decision over Ramon Tavares. Despite the fact that he did get knocked down in that fight, he did outstrike Tavares throughout the course of the fight volume-wise, but he was damaged in that one. This one seems crazy. This is more just one where it's like, Saidi, I was disappointed in that last fight. I thought, like, obviously, I think you definitely could have argued either way, I suppose. But I just wanted to see more of him out of that Ramon Tavares fight. I thought I remember picking him specifically at UFC 297. And I think that it is, like, real early to be counting Garrett Armfield out. I think Garrett Armfield, is proven dangerous. I don't know. Let's just take a look at Saidi before and remember, he's a Canadian fighting in Canada. I would love to give him credit for that and say that helps. I don't know if it does. 28 years old, 7 wins by knockout, comes into the UFC from BFL and BTC. Does have a loss to Matteo Vogel earlier in his professional career. I just don't know exactly why I'm supposed to be such a giant fan of Saidi in this one. Like, I think if, like, you're getting Garrett Armfield plus money here for a guy that has a win over Brad Katona recently and was very close to being able to put Brady Heistan away if Brady Heistan was not an extraterrestrial fighter. I don't know. Armfield plus 120? This is already good. I know this is going to be a weird card. It is going to be so hit or miss. We're trying to hit on everyone. I just see myself Garrett Armfield plus 120. I think he probably wins this fight like 55 times out of 100. I'm not giving up on Garrett Armfield yet just because of that last loss. I think people would be surprised the kind of fighter that Brady Heistan, as he continues to improve, who he can beat. And I just think this is a lot of credit to give Saidi so early when we've only seen him at the Contender Series in the UFC level fight one dude. That's a really weird circumstance when you spend so much time thinking about Ramon Tavares. God, I haven't been going with too many method of victories on this one, but I just don't know if you should up to this point. Next up, we got a heavyweight matchup between Alexander Romanov and Rodrigo Nascimento. Nascimento, the minus 117 favorite. Romanov, the minus 103 underdog. Very, very close. Let's go with Romanov first. All right, so Alexander Romanov, very strange run in the UFC. 6-3 in the UFC, 3 losses to guys that have, occupied the heavyweight rankings: Marcin Tybura, Alexander Volkov, and Jelton Almeida. It was a majority decision against Tybura, a fight that, had some really weird scoring circumstances to it, as I recall. Volkov put him away in round 1. Almeida put him away in round 1 when only 2 strikes in total were thrown. He does have a win July of 2023 against Blagoy Ivanov by unanimous decisions. Here's the problem. His wins are against guys like Rocky Martinez, Marcus Rogério de Lima, Juan Espino, Jared Vandera, Chase Sherman, Blagoy Ivanov. What are the best wins out of there? De Lima? Ivanov? I think that's what you'd have to say. Rodrigo Nascimento, on the other hand, kind of like a little bit in the same boat. Who's this dude beaten? Dontel Mays, twice. Michael Martinick on the Contender Series, who I believe is over in KSW or an Octagon at the moment. Losses to Chris Dawkins and most recently Derek Lewis. The 3 wins that he has since September of 2022. Tanner Bozer, Ayir Latifi, and Dontel Mays. All 3 of those were decisions. 2 of them were split decision victories. So, I don't know, man. This is another one where Like, what do I think Rodrigo Nascimento beats Alexander Romanov in? You know, like, what this comes down to is, like, can Romanov win the first 2 rounds? I absolutely think that he can. We haven't seen this with Rodrigo Nascimento, and we saw what happened when he tried to take a step up in competition against Derek Lewis, who, you know, is quickly approaching 40 years old and is going to be on this card. We'll get to that in a little bit. I think I have to go Alexander Romanov, and I have not been confident in Romanov for a bit, especially like going back to that Juan Espino win, where he, like, because of the way that fight ended, he probably should have ended up losing that fight. He's just had some really strange performances, but, like, at least we've seen him against the Volkovs, the Tiburas, and the Jelton Almeidas. Even though those were all losses, I think the Blagoy-Ivanov win is maybe like just enough to tell me that like he's just a tiny step above Rodrigo Nascimento in quality. I think like I don't necessarily have to see my way to an Alexander Romanov submission because I think that that's going to be a hard one. I think like a TKO is very doable here for Alexander Romanov. I think straight up money line minus 103 for a guy that I think probably wins like 55 of these out of 100, I think is very fair. And like Romanov by decision is plus 400. Romanov inside the distance plus 185. I don't know. Maybe we just go a step further and go Romanov by TKO knockout plus 350. I think that might actually be the best way to go. If I'm going Nascimento, I think you go Nascimento by decision. I think that, like, you know, at least the impact of his strikes over the course of a fight, I think that's like that can be enough clearly, as we have seen, to get split decisions over, you know, heavyweights that just like aren't of that high a quality. They've certainly been around the block. Nascimento by decision is plus 250. I think that's probably the best way to go if you're going Nascimento. Next up, we've got, what do we got? We got a featherweight matchup between Jack Shore and Youssef Zalal. Jack Shore is the plus 222 underdog. Zalal the minus 262 favorite. Let's talk about Jack Shore, the plus 222 underdog first. So, loser at 2 of his last 3. It was, you know, it was a step up in competition that we saw for Jack Shore because those losses came both in the second round to Ricky Simone and Anderson Brito. A win against Makwan Amir Khani in the meantime, March of 2023 at UFC 286. His best other win is probably like Tamir Valiev by unanimous decision, who he knocked down twice but didn't put away. Wins against Ludwig Shalinian, Hunter Azor, Aaron Phillips. You know, like, 2 of those guys are like non-Ultimate Fighter winners. You know, actually, Teamer is another one. So, like, we definitely had to put the brakes on Jack Shore, who, like, had a really solid 5-fight winning streak coming into the UFC, but when he made that step up in competition against guys that, you know, are in the rankings, it did not go so well. Youssef Zalal, on the other hand, he's actually about a year younger, or, you know, a little bit close to it. So, you know, this is kind of where the danger comes in for Jack Shore, too, is like Zalal, we saw have to step away from the UFC for a little less than 2 years after a draw with Damon Blackshear, I believe. And Zalal had to fight Ilia Topuria, Sungwoo Choi, Sean Woodson, Damon Blackshear in a row. And, you know, one of those guys looks like he's going to be the UFC featherweight champion for a very long time.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
Now, Youssef Zalal is back in the UFC, riding 2 straight rear naked choke victories, both this year, starting March of 2024, against Billy Quarantillo and Jarno Aarons. You know, I think, like, it would be kind of an easy thing to say, like, you know, I think that Youssef Zalal, he's not, I don't think he's of the quality of Simone, and I don't think he's of the quality of, who's the other one? Anderson Brito, you know, straight up. But I do think the Moroccan Devil might just be at Jack Shore's level or just a tiny, tiny step above. You know, like Jack Shore, I think we've kind of seen his hand. And really going through that winning streak, we could have picked it apart at the time, and a lot of people did, of like those wins that he was kind of like, where we were seeing his vulnerabilities. I think it is very fair that Zaleo is the favorite. I think minus 262 is a little bit much. I can easily see your way to this one with you know, if you think that this is a bit of an overreaction, I can definitely see your way to going Jack Shore just money line plus 222. And I think Zaleo by submission plus 800, I do think is maybe the more appealing one because it offers more, and Jack Shore has been finished twice, you know, in his last 3 fights. But we are talking about a difference between, you know, Yusuf Zaleo and Giannis and Brito, and Yusuf Zaleo and Ricky Simone. Those are different things in finishing Jack Shore. And I do think Jack Shore will, you know, even if he loses this fight, I think he survives. I could see this being a really close decision, too. Zaleo by decision plus 100, Shore by decision plus 300. Either one of them by split decision plus 900 for Shore, plus 700 for Zaleo. Over 2.5 rounds is minus 280 here. So I think, like, and Zaleo was doing, you know, doing well against Aarons and Quarantillo before he ended up getting those submissions. And, you know, I think it's hard. I don't want to dump on Jack Shore too much. Like, he really did, you know, have some really well-rounded, full-bodied wins before this losing of 2 of his last 3. And was able to submit Makwan and Mirikani. So I think that this fight does go the distance. I think Zaleo is just slightly more likely to win this. But, like, after Zaleo by decision, I think my next favorite one is Shore by decision plus 300. And then maybe Zaleo by submission. I don't know. And I can see, absolutely, I can see picking either by split decision, flip of a coin. Who knows what's going to happen in Canada. And Shore plus 222 money line. I think there's value there too. This is a good fight. I'm looking forward to this one. And I won't be upset if Jack Shore ends up getting the win. I'd like to see that guy go on another run and, like, with, you know, in a tier up in competition. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup again between Charles Air Jourdain and Victor Henry. Charles Jourdain is the minus 138 favorite. Victor Henry, the plus 118 underdog. Let's start off with Victor Henry. Victor Henry has won 3 of his 5 UFC fights. The fight against Javid Basharat ended up being a no contest. Unanimous decision over Rayoni Barcelos, January of 2022. A split decision against Tony Gravely. And here's the thing, for DFS purposes, in his 3 wins, Victor Henry landed 181, 154, and 109 strikes against Barcelos, Tony Gravely, and Ronnie Yaya. And he knocked down Ronnie Yaya twice en route to a 3rd-round knockout. The only real loss is by unanimous decision to Rafael Assunção, which was very close statistically. Charles Jourdain actually is 8 years younger than Victor Henry. Coming off of 2 straight losses after I was really enjoying, like, Charles Jourdain starting off with, like, the, the Shane Burgos fight, you know, in 2022. That dude landed 113 strikes to Burgos' 42. Still ends up losing the majority decision. This is a guy that's had a lot of fights in the UFC. And really, like, I feel like the sentiment that I have about him is that he's won more than he actually has. He's had to fight tough fighters, though. I mean, 4 of his last 6 opponents is Shane Burgos, Nathaniel Wood, Sean Woodson, Gene Silva. Those were all losses. 3 of them by decision, 1 by split decision to Sean Woodson, where, if you recall, he thought he won because he thought that Bruce Buffer said Charles when he really said Sean.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
Pressed the wrong soundbite. But anyway, got knocked down twice against Gene Silva en route to a 2nd-round knockout. The advantage here, you would think, for Charles Jourdain is just more in his well-roundedness. Even so, I do like Victor Henry in DFS because I do think that this fight is as close as these odds suggest. And in a Victor Henry victory, I think it's very likely that we see triple-digit strikes here. Charles Jourdain would be well-versed to turn this into a mixed martial arts fight because grapple with him however you can. And, Victor Henry has still, been victorious before in that. And Charles Jourdain has had to fight tougher competition for sure. I think Charles Jourdain minus 138 is very reasonable. And I think that, this fight also ends up going the distance. I've had a lot of those lately. I mean, over 2.5 rounds here is minus 300. Jourdain by decision is plus 155. Victor Henry by decision is plus 155. Each of them by split equal plus 500. I think all of those make plenty of sense. I do think that this is almost a flip of the coin. I'm tempted on either one of the money line. But, at least for scoring purposes, I do like that if in a victory, it's very likely that Victor Henry ends up landing 100 strikes or more. So, if Charles Jourdain is able to get him down 2 or 3 times, and I think Charles Jourdain, definitely has, meaningful striking, and I think, just maybe Jourdain by submission, too, makes some sense. That's plus 1,600. We haven't seen a whole lot of Victor Henry in the UFC, and not against the tier of competition that Charles Jourdain is used to facing. So I do think that's a little presumptuous. Now, Ronnie Yahya wasn't able to do any of that when he fought Victor Henry. But Charles Jourdain is just a little bit more spry, right? So either one of them by decision, either one of them by split decision, either one of them money line. I'm probably going to opt for, Henry here, even though it's just a little bit more this could be 51 or 52 out of 100 for Charles Jourdain. This is another one I'm looking forward to just to see how this plays out. I think that this will be a very entertaining fight. I think this could be a fight where people get very upset by the decision, however it ends up going. So, yeah, I like both of these fighters in this fight almost an exact equal amount. I think, if I have to opt for one, I guess I'm going for the underdog, but that's probably the wrong idea because Charles Jourdain is just slightly more likely to get this win, and I think minus 138 is an all right price for that. Very interesting. That's the second matchup so far. No, it's the second matchup that I think we have sufficient information on, but there's already been a ton of really closely handicapped fights, just not that many in so far. Very interesting. And next up, we have a women's flyweight matchup between Ariane De Silva and Jasmine Jasudavicius. Former guest on Tap That, Jasmine Jasudavicius. Shout out to her, fighting in her home country of Canada. Jasudavicius is the minus 210 favorite. De Silva the plus 180 underdog. Let's start off with De Silva. De Silva, winner of 3 of her last 4 of her last 6, dating back to September of 2021. She has fought Antonina Shevchenko, Montana De La Rosa, Molly McCann, Joanne Wood. Those were all losing performances. These 3 most recent wins have been to solid competition. JJ Aldrich, who she landed 101 strikes on with 2 takedowns, a split decision win over Melissa Gatto, and then she's coming, her last win is December 2023, UFC 296, a second-round armbar over Casey O'Neill, who bounced back and looked fantastic in her last fight against Lana Santos. But De Silva is coming off a unanimous decision loss to Karine Silva. She did outstrike her 42-27, but she got taken down 5 times. That was, the 5th win in a row for Karine Silva. And it was the least impressive that she has looked up to this point. So at least credit to De Silva there for making her look just a little bit less impressive. Jasmine Jasudavicius has lost twice in the UFC. One to the better Silva, Natalia Silva, by unanimous decision in what was a brutalization, to be fair. Wins over Julia Pilastri and Kay Hansen coming into the UFC. Her kind of landmark win that got her in the rankings was against Miranda Maverick by unanimous decision. She ends up losing to Tracy Cortez, getting outstruck 103-77, did get 2 takedowns, gets a submission by anaconda choke against Priscilla Cachoeira to start off this year at UFC 297. And then a unanimous decision win over Fatima Klein, July of 2024, outstriking her 40-39, 4 takedowns to 1. So, again, even though, like, De Silva does have, like, you know, you look at the Casey O'Neill wins and you look at the J.J. Aldrich win, there's some recognition in the names that she has beaten for sure. And, you know, I think that, I mean, like, we're seeing Tracy Cortez come off a loss to Rose Namajunas. You know, otherwise, she was 6 for 6 in the UFC. The Miranda Maverick win was very meaningful for Jasmine. The Priscilla win was very meaningful. That's the best win that either of those two has. Even still with the Casey O'Neill win for De Silva. Probably. The Maverick and O'Neill, those are all pretty close. But I do think that Jasmine is the kind of fighter that shows out for her home country. I don't think that that's going to bother her at all. And I think that she is just like the better fighter than Ariana De Silva. And if it comes, this is mixed martial arts. Outside of Natalia Silva and Tracy Cortez, I don't think De Silva is of that level. And Jasmine Jasudavicius, I think whether there's 40 strikes landed, whether there's 100 strikes landed for her, whether it's 2 takedowns or 4 takedowns, I really trust that up till the final bell, if it does go the distance, that she will do everything in her power to win this inside the Canadian borders. And so, like, Jasmine, rightfully a favorite here, minus 210. It's kind of a lot, but I think it's fair. Jasmine by decision, minus 120. That's probably where I'm going. I do think Jasmine wins this fight. Probably like 75, maybe 80 times out of 100. And probably 70 to 75. I think that's much more realistic. Minus 120 by decision makes sense. If you're going to Silva, I don't think you need to pick a method of victory. I think plus 180 is just fine. And then, like, you know, I don't know. If you just wanted to go, like, Jasmine inside the distance, too, that's plus 280. I'd prefer Jasmine by decision, though, minus 120. I think that's the safer play. Over 2.5 in this fight is minus 260. I don't think I'll be going with Jasmine in DFS, just based on how I'm feeling right now, because I think that she could win and it could be low scoring. I think she could win and it could be high scoring. I think it might be a flip of a coin, and for the price that she might be at, that's not a flip I'm willing to make. But best of luck to Jasmine Jasudavicius. Definitely going to be rooting for her. She was one of the early, guests on Tap That. And shortly after her fight in Cage Fury that was coming up, she ends up fighting on the Contender Series and working her way into the UFC. So that was super cool to see at the time, and it's cool to see her success now. Another bantamweight matchup. This one between Ayman Zahabi and Pedro Munoz. Pedro Munoz, the plus 100 underdog. Zahabi, the minus 120 favorite. Pedro Munoz has now only won one of his last 6 fights. That was against Chris Gutierrez, April of 2023, by unanimous decision. He did get outstruck 77-60, but he did land a knockdown in that fight. Then you got to go back to February of 2021 for his most recent win. After that, it's Jimmy Rivera, if that speaks to how long ago that was. He also had that knockout over Cody Garbrandt. He's had some good winning streaks in the UFC, really. He has wins over Rob Font, Brett Johns, Brian Caraway, if you remember that guy. But in that time, losses all by unanimous decision to Aldo, Dominic Cruz, had the no contest with Sugar Sean O'Malley, so we really don't know how that would have played out. It was pretty even up to the point that it ended up being stopped. And then, even with triple-digit strikes landed against Cheeto Vera, ends up losing a unanimous decision. He's coming off a unanimous decision loss to Kyler Phillips, UFC 299, getting outstruck 114-52. Zahabi is only like 1 year younger than Pedro Munoz, which is pretty shocking. But, what he's done over the last 4 fights, and I guess, maybe it's not that impressive because, again, he's not that young, and he started in the UFC back in February of 2017. But his 2 losses in the UFC are both over 5 years ago to Ricardo Ramos and Vince Morales. Since returning to the UFC, February 2021, or, since, returning from what was about a 2-year hiatus, he's now on a 4-fight winning streak with 2 knockouts over Draco Rodriguez and Aori K. Ling, and unanimous decision wins over Ricky Tercios and Javid Basharat. Outstriking both of them with a combined count of 129 strikes to 94. He had a knockdown of Aori K. That was a first-round knockout, so obviously he had a knockdown. Yeah, this is a tough one to call, too. Pedro Munoz, a little bit over the hill now. This is one, again, where it's very understandable that this is a closely handicapped fight. And it's another one where, if Zahabi hadn't beaten Javid Basharat, I would have, some real, I'd be like, how do I compare the competition level between Zahabi and Pedro Munoz? But Pedro Munoz has lost, a lot in a row. It wasn't that long ago, though, that he was performing admirably against the guy, Sean O'Malley, who ends up going on to be the bantamweight champion. He's just fought way tougher dudes than Zahabi over the last even, 4 years. Pedro Munoz tends to be able to go the distance. Over 2.5 being minus 450. That makes sense. I don't think, I think maybe the more likely the two to get the knockout here is Zahabi. That's plus 1,000. I guess that's one to look out for, right? Because Pedro Munoz, as you're 38 years old, you can only not get knocked out in this stretch of time fighting good fighters for so long. I think Zahabi by decision plus 110. Munoz plus 160 by decision. I think you probably should go Zahabi. I think at this point, it's fair to say that, I think that this will be close. I don't think that, either both of these guys will get in triple digits or neither of them will. And I think it could be 76 to 65, 54 to 63, something like that for either dude. But I think Zahabi's strikes will just be a little bit more meaningful. I can't keep weighing that much in favor of the guy who's had tougher competition when you've lost so many of them. But, then again, he does have a win over Chris Gutierrez not that long ago at all. Yeah. Damn. And Javid Basharat, who is Javid Basharat? Who is he? This is a really tough one. Both these guys are old. I don't know. Munoz by decision plus 160, I think makes sense. I think this could be a split decision too. Those odds are at plus 450 and plus 525. I think Zahabi just has a little bit more time left, but was he ever at the level that Pedro Munoz was able to actually compete at? That's the question. And Munoz, I think there's still enough strength in those Gutierrez and Vera performances. Kyler Phillips, even though he got outclassed by Rob Font, on October 19th, that's still a guy that had a 3-fight winning streak over Rojo, Ryan Barcelos, Munoz. He's beaten Song Yadong. Only 2 losses are to Pava and Rob Font. I can't hold that too much against Pedro Munoz. I don't know. Maybe Pedro Munoz as the underdog does make a little bit more sense here. I think the method of victory is a little bit more predictable. But, look at Zahabi by knockout plus 1,000. I think that's maybe worth that number just seems insane to me. And I think, again, nowadays it's hard to go wrong with a split decision prop. This is yet another one that I think is very tough to call. 2 guys, again, just at very different, who have had very different UFC trajectories and find themselves on equal footing on Saturday. Next up, we got a welterweight matchup between Mike Malott and Trevin Giles. Malott is... Come on. The minus 265 favorite, Giles the plus 225 underdog. Now, Mike Malott, coming off of that 3rd round TKO loss to Neil Magny.
but I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
As you recall, this is a fight where if Mike Malott had survived at UFC 297, likely would have gotten that win, or was well on his way to. Gets finished in the closing seconds by Neil Magny, and it calls into question so much of what Mike Malott, did up to this point. Because really, this guy isn't a prospect. What's he? Now he's 33 years old, 32 years old, and with his birthday coming up. And his best wins are Yohan Lanese and Adam Fugit, who he was able to submit. All his wins, have been inside the distance. 3 submissions, 1 knockout over Mickey Gall. Trevin Giles has not won since March of 2023 when he fought Preston Parsons. This guy has fought he's fought Roman Dolidze, who he's beaten. He's fought Gerald Mearshart. He's fought Bevan Lewis. And and actually got the knockout in that one. He's fought Dricus du Plessis, Michael Morales. He just hasn't won since March of 2023, and his last 2 wins were close. Now, at Louis Sosay, it wasn't really that close of a fight by unanimous decision, but the Preston Parsons win was a split decision. Now he's coming off getting finished twice in a row by some up-and-coming fighters in Gabriel Bonfim and Carlos Paredes. No sets of fighters in the UFC give me more headaches than the Basharats and the Bonfims, trying to predict what their trajectory is. Anyway, I think that this fight is pretty well set up for Malott to win, honestly. I think that's what they want, especially in Canada. They want to give him that opportunity to, kind of redeem himself. Neil Magny is a tough and savvy veteran. He can do that to a lot of people, catching them off guard when, they're not when they're caught lacking for lack of a better term in the later rounds. But Neil Magny is not Trevin Giles, or probably better said, Trevin Giles is not Neil Magny. Trevin Giles has picked up some good wins in the UFC, but that is now 3-4 years ago, and in a different weight class. That was at middleweight, and at welterweight, probably dealing with a slightly better class of fighter here. I mean, a win over Roman Dolidze, sure, that is impressive. Good for him on that one. But Mike Malott, I do think he's probably going to get a couple of takedowns at the very least if this fight, goes past, a round and a half or, enters round 3. I think Malott striking, the way that he handled himself against Neil Magny leading up to him completely gassing out and ending up in a horrible position, I think that'll work against Trevin Giles. I think that the most likely outcome here is Malott by submission. That is plus 220. This fight to go over 1.5 rounds is minus 137. I think that is possible. The under is plus 107. If I was to pick one, I'd probably go over there. Just slightly, because I think Trevin Giles, I think Malott is not really a prospect. He's just a pretty good fighter that people like to watch. And I think Trevin Giles has been around the block enough to where, I think he can probably survive over 1.5 rounds. But then Malott turns the tables, maybe ends up getting the finish, past that 1.5 round point. Malott by submission, plus 220. Malott inside the distance, minus 135. That's probably how I'm going there. I do think Malott probably wins this fight 70 to 75 times out of 100. Minus 265 I think is fair. I just don't think plus 225 is worth it for Trevin Giles here. This is a if it was something crazy, if it was plus 300, if they were giving way too much credit to Malott, then sure. But it's been a while since I've seen something from Trevin Giles that really impressed me. So that's where I'm landing on that one. I think Mike Malott, the real key is, like we've talked about many times, you can always go back and forth on psychological factors. You could say Mike Malott is very motivated to win this fight. You could also say that that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. I don't think that I think maybe he got the jitters out that first time in a big fight against Neil Magny on a pay-per-view card. think maybe he's a little bit more calm this time. I can sprinkle a little bit more confidence on him from, maybe trying to go a little bit more down that dangerous psychological path. Next up, we got a middleweight matchup between Marc-Andre Barriault and Dustin Stoltzfus. Stoltzfus is... The hell is he? Unbelievable. There we go. Stoltzfus, the plus 170 underdog. MAB, the minus 200 favorite. Let's start off with Stoltzfus. Only 2 wins since he beat Joe Pyfer on the Contender Series over 4 years ago by first-round knockout. The only 2 wins since that time over Dwight Grant and Punahele Soriano. And that last one was December of 2023. It was a great fight by Stoltzfus, outstriking him 64-31, 4 takedowns to zilch, and a knockdown en route to the second round rear naked choke. The losses have been to quality opponents, just not past a certain level for sure. Losses to Kyle Dawkins, Rodolfo Vieira, Gerald Mearshart, Abus Magomedov, and most recently Bruno Ferreira by first-round knockout June of this year. So, a kind of clear level that we have not seen Dustin Stoltzfus ascend past. Which is weird that he has that win over Joe Pyfer still, August of 2020. That was a long time ago, though. And even though, Pyfer is not coming off a win over Marc-Andre Barriault. His only loss in the UFC is to Jack Hermanson. Pyfer's looked, great since then. He was talked about as a guy that would contend for a middleweight championship. And damn it. There we go. I think we're back. I elbowed a button here on my soundboard. But that's what Dustin Stoltzfus has been up to. Marc-Andre Barriault has lost 2 in a row to Chris Curtis by split decision and to Joe Pyfer by first-round knockout. Before then, his most recent win, June of 2023 at UFC 289 over Eric Anders. It was a pretty close decision, outstriking him 95-83 with a knockdown. Before that, it was Julian Marquez. Marc-Andre Barriault has been a fixture in the middleweight division. He's had a lot of fights here. Fought guys like Andrew Sanchez, Christoph Jacko, Jung Young Park, Abu Azatar, who he beat, Dolce Lungiambula, who he beat, with, combined 259 strikes in those 2 fights, and one of them ended by knockout against Abu Azatar. It's just that's a pretty lame set of 2 most recent wins. To get finished by Pyfer that quickly is problematic. But yet I was impressed with how close he was able to make it with the Action Man, January of 2024. Marc-Andre Barriault is just kind of a staple. I definitely trust that guy. And Stoltzfus has not done a lot of winning in the UFC with plenty of opportunities. But these fights have been close, he's done well. This is a tough one, especially with Bruno Ferreira looking just sort of out of sorts, and if Dustin Stoltzfus could have made it a little further into the fight against Bruno Ferreira, I think he could have ended up getting a finish. With how Bruno Ferreira gassed out this past week against Abus Magomedov. I do think Andre Barriault is probably the safest money line play. How do I think he does it? Probably a decision victory. I don't think he knocks out Dustin Stoltzfus. I think he could. I just think Ferreira and Abus Magomedov were just a little bit more in their knockout phase. If Marc-Andre Barriault was going to knock someone out, you'd hope it was, your last knockout and your last 2 finishes being against Julian Marquez and Jordan Wright. I'm not horribly impressed, but your fight against the Action Man Curtis, I was impressed with. I think the most reasonable thing here is Marc-Andre Barriault by decision, which is plus 160. Over 2.5 is minus 140 in this fight. I think that makes a lot of sense, but if it's plus 110 under 2.5, I think that's on Stoltzfus' side. either way, I think Stoltzfus has maybe a few more ways to win this fight. Like, I could see several different outcomes for Stoltzfus. I could see a knockout, probably not a submission, but like I could see more a decision and a knockout in Stoltzfus' favor. Still, though, like money line plus 170, I think is reasonable for Stoltzfus. So I probably go Barriault by decision plus 160. Then my second favorite is Stoltzfus plus 170. I think MAB probably wins this one like 60, 65 times out of 100. But, you know, Stoltzfus, I don't think is done necessarily being a player in this middleweight division. Even coming off the losses that he's had. You know, No, he's had so many opportunities. That's why Marc-Andre Barriault by decision makes the most sense. But I do think that this could end up being a close fight, especially if it goes the distance. So, like, Stoltzfus money line plus 170, or if Stoltzfus ends up getting a knockout just because of the mileage that Marc-Andre Barriault has, that makes plenty of sense. And Stoltzfus by knockout is plus 600. God, these are really close calls for this weekend. There's a lot of really tough to call fights, but then again, I didn't necessarily think that last week or a few other recent weeks. And sometimes it's the weeks where you think that everything should be rather straightforward. Someone even asked me in the Rotoballer MMA Discord. Like, you think this is going to be a straightforward card? It's like, yes, but those are famous last words, and they certainly were. 4 fights remaining. We got a light heavyweight matchup between Cal Machado and Brinson Ribeiro. Machado is the minus 156 favorite. Ribeiro the plus 136 underdog. Machado, winner of 1 fight at the Contender Series or UFC level. Granted, all right, so he outstruck Kevin Zaflarski on the Contender Series just in August of 2023, 121-17. Fantastic performance. Loses a unanimous decision to Mick Parkin, despite outstriking him 76-39. He did get taken down 3 times. Then he loses a unanimous decision to Dontel Mays, April of this year. Outstruck Mays 76-67. Did get knocked down once. Brinson Ribeiro, winner of 1 in the Contender Series, and that was against Bruno Lopez by first-round knockout. He lost by first-round knockout to Zhangming Yang February of this year, and he's coming off a majority decision loss to Magomed Gadzhiyassimov. Got outstruck 26-17, taken down 5 times to 3. So, I do think that Cal Machado has definitely had the better 3-fight run from the Contender Series onward. Because there's and let's look at the scorecards here. So 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards on his loss to Dontel Mays. 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards in his fight with Mick Parkin. A combined 152, 273 strikes between those 3 fights. So DFS-wise, I really like Cal Machado. I think if you're, we've seen Cal Machado hurt. God. There we go. God, I keep doing that. We have seen Cal Machado hurt. Dontel Mays wasn't able to put him away. All 3 of his fights have gone the distance. So I do think if you're talking about one of these fighters that is more likely to get the finish, I guess it would be Ribeiro by knockout, which is plus 400. I think that's assuming a lot about Ribeiro though, because he didn't have to fight the likes of Mick Parkin. Magomed Gadzhiyassimov has had a decent run, since he came into the UFC as well. So they've each fought some decent competition. Zhangming Yang also 2-0. Coming out of Road to UFC from June of 2022. And both of his wins were by first round knockout. I don't know. So I would still think Ribeiro is the more likely of the 2 to get a knockout. I do think that it's very possible Like, we're a very small distance away from Cal Machado being 3-0 from the Contender Series on. On that alone, I do think that minus 156 is a fair number. I do think he wins this fight like 60 to 65 times out of 100. It's still early for me to express that much confidence in either of these two dudes. You know, they're both relatively young. Machado is, you know, Bigfoot is his nickname, 2 years older than Bridson Ribeiro. But Ribeiro by knockout plus 400, Machado by decision plus 235 actually is less likely, apparently, to bet online than Machado by knockout at plus 215. That's assuming a lot, too, because Zhang Mingyang, you know, was putting people to sleep beforehand. And, you know, Machado has, you know, shown a pretty rock-solid ability to just land volume strikes but not necessarily put anybody away. It's a good measured approach to take for light heavyweight. And I think that if the, you know, over 1.5 rounds in this fight, minus 150, I like that. Because I at least think that the striking of Machado, if he can just survive a bomb by Ribeiro, I think this fight ends up going into the third round. And I think if Machado does get the finish, I think it ends up coming later in the fight once he's worn Ribeiro down. But I really do like Machado by decision plus 235, and I think minus 156 on the money line is pretty fair as well. 3 fights remaining, and now we've got a heavyweight matchup between Derek Lewis and Yonata Diniz. Diniz is the favorite here, the minus 175 favorite against Derek Lewis, the plus 150 underdog. Let's talk about the Black Beast first. Has now won 2 of his last 3 fights. Because he was on a 3-fight losing streak there against Tai Tuivasa, Sergey Pavlovich, and Sergey Spivak. Not having great luck against dudes named Sergey. And, you know, I mean, this guy only a few years separated from fighting for the interim title. Don't forget about that. Last 3 wins by knockout, of course. I mean, my God. I can't believe that Derek Lewis even has 4 decision victories in the UFC, but so many knockouts, a record-setting amount of knockouts. And now since July of 2023, UFC 291, winner of 2 of his last 3 against Marcus Rogerio de Lima. Marcus Rogerio de Lima, who will be eating rice pudding through a straw for the rest of his life because of Derek Lewis. And then a 3rd-round knockout of Rodrigo Nascimento. That was May of this year. The other fight that he lost was against Jelton Almeida in between then, November of last year, in a fight that I still think stinks to high heaven.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
I keep meaning to press this.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
I don't care what anybody says. That should have been a submission victory for Jelton Almeida. He didn't want the submission. Why that is, we will forever be left to speculate. But that's what's been going on for Derek Lewis. He's pushing 40 years old and has actually won 2 of his last 3 against guys that have always been kind of teetering on the rankings of heavyweight. Yonata Diniz, on the other hand, all right? So came into the UFC with 2 knockouts over Eduardo Neves and Austin Lane. Diniz is, you know, a very high-level kickboxer. And, you know, I want to go back and see exactly because Diniz is only 33 years old. How tall is he? 6'4", with an 80-inch reach, 7 knockouts in MMA, and, you know, a high-level kickboxing pedigree before coming into the UFC. We've seen so many dudes do well with that transition. And, you know, a knockout over Austin Lane looks a little bit better after Austin Lane was able to beat Robelis, you know, a couple weeks ago when I had that plus 300 on Wager Wars. But it was this most recent fight, and it's weird. Like, Diniz didn't look amazing against Carl Williams, and you have to wonder, was Carl Williams trying to fight a more exciting style? That doesn't make much sense to me, that you would go out and fight a style that doesn't work for you against a pro kickboxer because you want to be seen as more exciting so you can stay in the UFC. I don't fully buy that. That's the narrative people want to push because it's, you know, it's anti kind of UFC brass. I get that. And I definitely think that it's funny too, because for all the push against boring styles of fighters, people will still say that like Carl Williams was trying to fight a more exciting fight. Well, you lost. There's nothing worse for your career in the UFC than, being a not household name and you lose looking horrible because you were trying to kickbox a kickboxer. This is a fight that I would be concerned with Denise for because, you just can't get hit by Derek Lewis. That's the issue. Can Denise win a kickboxing match with Derek Lewis and not get hit with the big punch? And I think that, probably, I don't need to think that he knocks out Derek Lewis. I think that he's going to be worried enough. Derek Lewis might walk into some traps, but I do think that Denise is going to have to fight a really smart fight to stay safe in this one. So if I'm going Yanada Denise, not going money line minus 175, not taking any over-unders here because it's too polar. But Denise by decision plus 650 makes the most sense to me. If he's just kind of walking on eggshells but does his kickboxing thing against Derek Lewis, maybe it's a couple of hard shots, but Derek Lewis is just probably not going to match the volume that Denise is able to throw at him. But obviously, if you're going to be standing the entire fight, Derek Lewis knows you're going to be standing the entire fight. I cannot knock Derek Lewis by knockout plus 175. And against a kickboxer, I don't think that there's value to going Lewis money line at plus 150 instead of Lewis by KO. Just because, it's hard for me to see Derek Lewis winning the decision here. I think either Denise is able to stay safe with his kickboxing the entire fight, or he gets clipped once and he's out cold. That's what happens when you fight Derek Lewis. And I want to see Denise make his way up this heavyweight division. I thought that's kind of where Carl Williams was headed. But I'm just not still completely sold on Denise's ceiling at this point, even though he's only 33 years old. But, win against Derek Lewis is going to propel him right, into fighting, a higher echelon of guy because he's already doing that. So two very different styles of stand-up that we're going to be seeing. And, every stand-up outcome under the sun is possible for one fighter and then a whole different world of possibilities for the other. That didn't make any sense. But you see what I'm saying? It's dangerous to stand with Derek Lewis, as we well know. But, for Derek Lewis, when you're swinging big, it's always easier when you can take him down. So he knows that he's going to get an opportunity. But Denise is not going to stray from what he is world class at. So, I think that that's the path to decision for Yanada Denise is just staying safe, staying on the outside, kickboxing, not getting overzealous and, just keeping your distance because that's what you got to do. I think Denise probably wins this fight on that basis, and especially because Derek Lewis is pushing 40. He's still got the power, obviously, as we've seen. But Denise probably wins this fight, I don't know, 55, 60 times out of 100. And I don't know. All of Derek Lewis's wins in this situation, I think, come by knockout. It's not like Derek Lewis versus Ngannou. That's a strong contrast where either guy knows that if either guy touches each other, that they're probably going to sleep. These are two very different styles of strikers for this heavyweight division. And now we are to the co-main event of the evening. And it is a women's flyweight matchup between Erin Blanchfield and Thug Rose Namajunas. Thug Rose is actually the plus 110 underdog. Blanchfield, the minus 130 favorite. Thug Rose, I know I don't have to tell you because you're going to be saying the Lord's Prayer, but...
One comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
So with that, let's talk about Erin Blanchfield first. Blanchfield, winner of 6 in a row in the UFC, entering, back in September of 2021. Wins over Miranda Maverick, J.J. Aldrich, Molly McCann, Jessica Andrade, and Tyler Santos most recently. August of 2023 by unanimous decision. These have been close fights. If she didn't put 3 of those away, they were still relatively close fights up to the point that she ended up finishing them. And the win over Tyler Santos, the win over Andrade, those are the hallmarks at this point for her. Now, she is coming off a unanimous decision loss to Manon Fiorot. March of this year, getting outstruck 172-130, did get taken down once. Born in 1999. Thug Rose Namajunas, born in 1992. Since her loss, in what was a close fight against Manon Fiorot, and since her, and that was right after the split decision loss to Carla Esparza, and what, even as, someone who has been a Thug Rose fan throughout her career, that was one of the most boring title fights that I've ever seen. And you could have given it to either fighter, I suppose, because so little happened. But, people were saying Thug Rose was done after the loss to Esparza and Fiorot, and now she has bounced back with 2 straight unanimous decision victories over Amanda Ribas and Tracy Cortez. She landed a combined 189 strikes in those 2 fights, 6 takedowns. She really, beat down Tracy Cortez July of this year. She's got 2 wins in 2024. This is another week where I do tend to agree with my man Blood Money's analysis here. I do think that Rose just has a level of versatility and dynamicism, I think would be the best word, that Erin Blanchfield doesn't have. And, Tyler Santos, who is now, no longer in the UFC, probably should have been the UFC Women's Flyweight Champion after her fight with Valentina. But, I think, even though she landed 130 strikes against Manon Fiorot, I think the fact that she lost the volume battle, Rose is able to slow you down if she needs to. And she's able to press the volume if she needs to too. Erin Blanchfield can go to the ground and be aggressive with submissions. I just think Rose is the more well-rounded, dynamic fighter in this one. I think that's probably going to be the deciding factor here. Even with Erin Blanchfield's 2 wins at flyweight, I still think for flyweight purposes, that Rose probably has the best, 2 last fights. And the fight with Manon Fiorot was very close for Rose. I think, what was the scorecards on that over 3 rounds? 29-28 on 2 judges' scorecards, 30-27 on Daryl Ransom's. So here, I do think it's about a flip of a coin. I actually would give a slight nod to Rose. I'd say if anybody wins 55 or 60 out of 100, I think it's Thug Rose. I think plus 110 makes a whole lot of sense here for Rose. And I think by decision, especially because this is going to be a 3-round fight, plus 185 for Rose, I think that's the method of victory to go for. I think Rose is worth it in DFS. I think the more likely of the 2, I suppose, to get the finish would be Blanchfield if you think that she can lock up a submission. But, Rose hasn't been submitted since December of 2014 against Carla Esparza. So Blanchfield by decision or by submission plus 350, I think is actually under. I would have liked to see that closer to plus 600. So I don't think plus 350 is worth it. But I think if you are going with a method of victory on Blanchfield, I think that's how you're going. Whew. Another one. It's good to see some closely handicapped fights on this card. God, remember those? We used to see them all the time, and then we started to get some boxing odds here over this past year. And now, for my favorite division in the UFC, nay the world, until they bring the UFC atomweight division up, we have a flyweight main event between former champion Brandon Moreno and prospect Amir Albazi.
Break out the red panties.
So, Brandon Moreno is the minus 174 favorite. Albazi, the plus 149 underdog. And look, Albazi has long been a part of this class of flyweight prospects that we knew was going to be making a move upward. With Tatsuro Taira, Makayev until, all this crazy stuff with Muhammad Makayev now trying to work his way back to the UFC. Really, he should just talk to a therapist or just like a close friend. Help. Where are his friends at? Make this guy easier to work with. But, and Manel Cape was another one. And now Kaya Sakura is making his way over. The point is, there were all these flyweight prospects, and there was a mad dash to the top. Steve Erceg weirdly got the shot first. And Amir Albazi is always I always had him in the bottom half of that list of prospects as opposed to the top. Though it seems like they've wanted this guy to succeed since he came into the UFC July of 2020. The activity level has just not been there for Amir Albazi. 4 fights since January of 2021. A unanimous decision over Zolga Zumagulov. Then a first-round rear naked choke over Francisco Figueiredo. A third-round knockout against Alessandro Costa. And then a split decision win over Kai Kara-France in his last fight. June of 2023, it was the main event. Over the course of 5 rounds, he got outstruck 99-43, 2 takedowns to 1. Kai Kara-France is kind of like my flyweight version of who am I thinking? Corey Sandhagen. Where it's like, even though it hasn't worked out this way, I still think on any given night this guy could end up being the champion of this division. Kai Kara-France should have won that fight against Amir Albazi. So even though it's a win, and it got him this opportunity against a former champion in Brandon Moreno, Amir Albazi was not the better fighter against Kai Kara-France.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
So that's where I landed on Amir Albazi. And really, this guy is now 31 years old as of 3 days ago. That's not he's actually a couple months older than the assassin baby, Brandon Moreno. So Brandon Moreno, where do we start, with this dude? Let's start going all the way back to that. The dudes this guy's already fought since October 2016 when he made his UFC debut. Fought Sergio Pettis, Alexander Pantoja, who has proven to be his kryptonite. Had a draw with Askar Askarov. Wins over KKF, Josier Formiga, Brandon Royval. Then the three straight fights against Divas and Figueiredo where there was a draw, a win, a loss. Came back, won the interim belt. By third round knockout over Kai Kara-France, ends up getting the flyweight belt back from Divas and Figueiredo. What a saga it was. Then he loses by split decision to Pantoja and by split decision to Brandon Royval. He landed a combined 259 strikes in those 2 fights, 5 takedowns. And the only people that have beaten this guy in the UFC are especially over the last few years, are the best flyweights in the world. We just saw from what Brandon Royval was able to do to Tatsuro Taira. It's another guy that on any given night, if he gets the opportunity, Brandon Royval could very easily end up the UFC flyweight champion if the circumstances end up right. If he gets another shot, absolutely. Even more so than all the chances they gave to Joseph Benavidez. Brandon Royval could easily, just like KKF, end up being the flyweight champion. So Brandon Moreno, I'm rocking with you again. I have to. Amir Albazi did not beat Kai Kara-France. He beat him, but he was not better than him. Brandon Moreno, if he's going to be landing triple-digit strikes, getting a few takedowns, surviving the submission, and in the UFC, he has never been submitted. I think that, these odds are very appropriate. Brandon Moreno minus 174. I think he wins this fight 70 to 75 times out of 100. I like minus 174. I like Brandon Moreno by decision plus 155. If you're going Albazi, I think you have to go by decision plus 190, then Albazi by submission plus 800. I believe more in Moreno's ability to survive any submission attempts than, Albazi's ability to be able to lock that in against Brandon Moreno is once again a step up in competition when I don't think he should have passed the test the first time. So Moreno by decision plus 155. I think that he, even more so than KKF did, I think that, that if there's grappling exchanges, I think that Moreno is a salamander down there and can, end up getting in advantageous positions if that's where Albazi wants to take it, more so than KKF was able to. And I think that Moreno is easily the better suited fighter and end up landing triple-digit strikes here. So I feel strongly that Brandon Moreno will be in a lot of my DFS lineups. The over 4.5 in this fight is minus 240. seems pretty crazy. But probably fair. So Moreno by decision plus 155. Again, maybe this ends up being kind of the same vibe as last week. Maybe we see a turning of the page. Maybe we see a new era and a new cast of characters arise, and the heroes of yesteryear, end up with more losses. But I don't think Brandon Moreno's at that point. And I think that Amir Albazi needs to have improved a lot since his last fight. And he had plenty of time to do so, granted. But it's going to take a lot of improvement overall to be able to beat Brandon Moreno on Saturday. Folks, that is it for episode 156 of RotoBallers' official MMA podcast. Tap that. Again, look out for my MMA DFS values picks article coming out on Friday afternoons. You want to follow my picks on all major MMA promotions, UFC Fight Pass events, major boxing cards. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, leave favorable reviews, leave some comments, interact. I'm getting on, what's it called? StreamYard? Yeah, I'm getting on StreamYard soon, and I'm going to just start doing a little bit more like live YouTube stuff. So hopefully I get a little bit more interaction from you folks listening. We got more, and also, look out for those slideshow, that MMA slideshow content that I should be working on here coming up soon. But really, next week, the MMA action across the world really heating up. We got Invicta, LFA 1. So, this week, though, I'm excited for the UFC to be in Edmonton and another flyweight main event. Have yourselves a great weekend. Thank you all for listening. Have a happy Halloween and peace.